Hi everyone, this is For the Love of Comics and a very warm welcome to the latest installment in our complete collection tour. For those of you who are new here, this is a viewer requested tour of our complete comics collection. Because I like to talk about comics so much, I've been dedicating one video per shelf and we've done 11 shelves and 11 videos so far. You can find all of these collected in this playlist linked above and in the description below, to which today we're going to be adding shelf number 12. Shelf number 12 is dominated by Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly, like a couple of my other shelves, but also contains many Vertigo titles, as well as books from publishers like Archaea, Top Shelf, and other independent publishers. So without further ado, let me step out of your way so that we can take a closer look at shelf number 12. Right at the start, we have the paperback collected editions of Love and Rockets brought out by Fantagraphics Press. These are collected by author, so volumes of Jaime Hernandez stories as well as volumes of Gilbert Hernandez stories are separate and right now represent the most affordable and accessible way of reading Love and Rockets. Maggie the Mechanic contains the start of Jaime's Maggie and Hopi stories, the Locas or Hoppers stories as they're known, which continue in The Girl from Hoppers, and Perla la Loca, amongst others. And the Gilbert Hernandez Palomar stories start from Heartbreak Soup, continue in Human Diastrophism, and then onward and beyond Palomar and others. Some of the other volumes I have are Esperanza and Penny Century, but there are at least 2 other volumes in this series that have continued to be published that I haven't picked up. That's because I started reading Love and Rockets in these collected volumes, so this is where I read the first and the second series, but from the third series onwards I've been collecting them in the original publications. If you're looking to get into Love and Rockets, as I said, this is perhaps the easiest and the most accessible way to do so. Then we have 3 volumes of Rust by Royden Lepp. Rust recently featured in my honorable mentions for best science fiction comics of all time, and I simply love this sepia tone series. So there's volume 1, Visitor in the Field, volume 2, Secrets of the Cell, and volume 3, Death of the Rocket Boy. In my honorable mentions video, I did say what a pity it was that the 4th volume was never published, and a couple of viewers immediately noted for me that it was in fact published last year. I have ordered volume 4 and this is where it's going to go when it arrives. Then we have some volumes of Parker by Darwin Cook published by IDW. Volume 1, The Hunter, is on loan to a friend, but here we have The Score, The Outfit, and Slayground. I know he had more books planned to be adapted. Then we have 2 volumes of the Acme Novelty Date Book, which is really a sort of sketchbook journal by Chris Ware, with some rare drawings, notes, and sketches, some of them very unlike the more popular Chris Ware works that we know. If you're a fan or scholar of Chris Ware, you owe it to yourself to at least take a look at these books. The Acme Novelty Date Book, Volume 1 and 2, both of which I was lucky enough to pick up autographed copies of. Then from Drawn and Quarterly, we have volumes of Aya. Set in the Ivory Coast in the late 70s, this is a delightful comic series, which while it presents a view of contemporary African life, also feels really universal because it's a comedy about relationships and dating and family and culture and many other things. This is volume 1, Aya. This is volume 2, Aya of Yop City. And volume 3, Aya, The Secrets Come Out. Volumes 4 and 5 are also out. They're collected together in one paperback volume from Drawn and Quarterly, and I need to get that. Then we have a couple of books by Chester Brown. Ed the Happy Clown. Interesting and experimental, but not really something that I loved, to be perfectly honest. While on the other hand, his biography of Louis Riel here in the hardcover collection, we saw the singles in another shelf, is something that I really enjoyed. Another book that I love is Vietnamerica, A Family's Journey by G.B. Tran, a harrowing and heartbreaking family autobiography. And the last book on the shelf over here is Meta Mouse, which is a look inside Art Spiegelman's Mouse. It's a book about Mouse, about how it was written. It contains numerous extras, as well as comes with a DVD, which contains a searchable PDF of the whole book. If you've read and appreciated Mouse, this makes a great companion piece. The second shelf starts with most of my Daniel Clowes. There are a couple of books in funny formats that are on other shelves, but everything else is over here. This is the special edition of Ghost World that I picked up a couple of years ago. I'm a big fan of Ghost World and I own it in several editions, as we'll see over here. If you're only going to have one edition, this is the one I'd go with. More than half of it is extras, just a fantastic collector's item for fans of Daniel Clowes. Ghost World is also a great introduction, and there's a reason why it's so popular. It is a lot more accessible and a lot more likable than some of his other works. This is Wilson, which I greatly enjoyed. I haven't seen the movie that's been based on it, but the comic itself is a series of vignettes that come together to form a very interesting picture of not really a likable or heroic character, but someone who you do feel for in spite of all their flaws. David Boring is a book that has grown on me. I admit that I didn't quite enjoy it the first time I read it, but I gave it another shot some years later, and my second read of it was far, far more favorable. Now I quite enjoy this book. Caricature, a collection of 9 stories. I think, yes, this is an autographed copy. And then a little bit of weirdness where I've got more editions of Ghost World and David Boring. Oh, there's the film tie-in edition of Ghost World. I think I picked these up because they were available very cheap. I mean, the equivalent of a couple of dollars, I think. Also, this Ghost World is in blue duotone, whereas this Ghost World is in green duotone. So that's more than enough reason for me to spend $2 on picking up other editions. Continuing with Clowes is 20th Century Eightball, a collection of pieces that were published in his anthology series Eightball. As were Ghost World and David Boring, they were originally serialized in Eightball. Here we have another edition of Caricature, the paperback this time. Sometimes people ask me why I have multiple copies of things, and this Daniel Clowes shelf is a good example of how illogical it can be sometimes of having the paperback and the hardcover. But I had Caricature first, and I had picked it up cheap, and this autographed hardcover was something I was able to pick up later, and I wasn't going to pass it up, so that's why I have 2 copies of that. Then Pusey, which is the way I choose to pronounce this. As a character, he's not as likable as Wilson, although I wouldn't say Wilson is likable either, but you sort of warm to him. I never quite warmed to this character. And then we have Patience, which is his sci-fi, in the way that David Boring is sci-fi epic, which I thought was a terrific book. I would say that after the Ghost World story, Patience is my favorite Daniel Clowes. Completely worth checking out if you haven't already. Then we have Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant by Roz Chast, a memoir about the loss of her parents, which I thought was a very heartfelt but also a very funny book. Dealing with the topic of aging and ailing parents, it's never a fun topic, but I was amazed at how funny and heartbreaking Roz Chast was able to make this memoir. Highly, highly recommended. Then we have a couple of books by Bprd, Other Lives and A Hate Collection, fun with Buddy and Lisa. Asaf Hanuka's The Realist, which I really enjoyed. And my 2 used paperback copies of Berlin, City of Smoke and City of Stones. City of Stones being book 1, City of Smoke being book 2. I haven't bought book 3 separately because obviously I have, as I showed in an earlier video, gotten Berlin, the all-in-one hardcover edition. Literally decades in the making, but completely worth it. One of the finest comics, in my opinion, ever made. Jason Lutesch's Berlin, something I recommend to almost everyone unequivocally. By Joyce Brabner and Harvey Pekar, Our Cancer Year, an honest and unflinching look at Harvey Pekar's bout with cancer. Then the trifecta of Nate Powell books, Any Empire, Swallow Me Whole, and the brand new Come Again. If you're not familiar with Nate Powell or only know him from the March trilogy of books, I'd highly recommend you pick one of these books out to take a look. My personal favorite of these 3 is Any Empire, I guess, but just by a hair's breadth. very, very good books. Drawn and Quarterly is a history of the publishing company. 25 years of contemporary cartooning, comics, and graphic novels. This is a mammoth book that contains some terrific comics, but also great behind-the-scenes stories about the publisher, about the different creators who have been involved with Drawn and Quarterly. I haven't finished this. I've gone through and read the comics bits and not the prose bits. I need to tackle this comprehensively one day. This is a hardcover of Charles Burns' Black Hole, a masterpiece of a comic that I hope to be spotlighting in its own video very soon. There are books by Charles Burns I haven't enjoyed as much as others have, but Black Hole just blew me away. I love this comic, and I hope to talk about it in detail soon. And then 2 hardcover editions of Craig Thompson comics. This is Habibi, a complex and controversial comic that deals with a lot of really difficult topics in a very poetic and, in my opinion, beautiful manner. And Habibi was obviously the follow-up to Blankets, Craig Thompson's memoir of young love and being brought up in a religious family, which is often considered one of the best comics of all time, and with very good reason. Both Blankets and Habibi should definitely be looked at by people who are interested in the medium of comics and what it can offer. The third shelf starts with The Legend of Sally Jones, which was a present from my wife, but it is a prequel to The Murderer's Ape, which is a book I've heard of but never read. So I haven't read this book yet because I'm waiting to get my hands on The Murderer's Ape. I mean, I know it's a prequel, but a prequel is always written after, so it should always be read after, is the way I look at it. Then we have a comics biography, the special edition of King by Ho Chi Anderson. This is the hardcover collection of the 3 volumes that comprised King. A terrific biography with some great writing and fantastic art by Ho Chi Anderson. Squeezed in over here is Daredevil by Frank Miller and Bill Sienkiewicz. It's completely out of place on the shelf, but I think I had it over here to straighten out a folded corner or something. Next is book 1 of My Favorite Thing is Monsters by Ml Ferriss. One of the most amazing comics I've read in recent years. Absolutely mind-blowing in its experimentation, in its form, but also in how complex and layered a story it tells. This is one of the most highly praised debuts and highly praised comics of recent years, and I've been waiting for book 2, which is scheduled for this year. If you're willing to take a chance on something different, this book could end up blowing your mind. Then we have Will Eisner's New York, a collection of different books including New York, The Building, City People, Notebook, and Invisible People. I mentioned this book in my How to Get Started Reading the Works of Will Eisner video, and it's probably out of place over here. I should put it in with my other Eisners that are shelf 9, I think. Then 2 books collecting the works of Edward Gorey. There's Amphigory, which collects 15 books, including the famous Gashly Crumb Tinies, and the follow-up volume Amphigory also. Containing another 15 or 16 books by Edward Gorey, these 2 volumes together form a really good overview of most of his work. Then the 2 volumes of Remind, a book that I don't hear a lot of people talking about, but which I thought was fantastic. It's a bit science fiction, it's a bit fantasy, it's got a weird cat. It's a nice twisting story with some spectacular art. By writer-artist Jason Brubaker. I think this might be self-published. It's from Coffee Table Comics, but the logo looks awfully similar to the cat in this story. If you can get your hands on them, Remind Volumes 1 and 2 are completely worth checking out. Then a collection of James Sturm stories, James Sturm's America, God, Gold, and Golems. This is a used copy my wife found for me in an old bookstore and contains The Revival, Hundreds of Feet Below Daylight, and The Golem's Mighty Swing. I own The Golem's Mighty Swing in a standalone volume, but not the other 2 books. We saw Market Day on one of the other shelves, and I talked about Off Season as a book of James Sturm's coming out this year. A wonderful writer-artist that I really enjoy. Here is The Golem's Mighty Swing, actually, right here. This is the original trade paperback version that was later collected in this hardcover with 2 other books. A wonderful story about Depression-era Bush League baseball and an Orthodox Jewish team. Harvey Pekar's autobiographical The Quitter with art by Dean Haspiel. Barnum in Secret Service to the USA, written by Howard Chaykin and Tishman with art by Nico Henrichon, who also did Pride of Baghdad. Houdini, The Handcuff King by Jason Lutesh, a slim little biography that focuses on one particular performance. Then we have Sparks by Lawrence Marvin, the subject of my perhaps the best comic you've never heard of video. Never completed in single issue form, and the trade paperback is out of print, but a lovely, lovely book if you can get your hands on it. Then 2 books by Brandon Graham. King City, very funny, very good science fiction. Almost made my top 10 science fiction list. Actually, a number of Brandon Grahams almost made that list. King City is perhaps my favorite of his works. I'm also a big fan of puns, and I don't think I've seen anyone who's as good as them as Brandon Graham is, whether they're visual puns or textual. Also by Brandon Graham is the complete Multiple Warheads, which I also enjoyed quite a lot. As I did Johnny Hero by Fred Chow, a very charming story that mashes together superpowered monster fighting and a slice of life relationship story. Then 2 books by Bastien Vives, I think that's how it's pronounced, let me know if that's wrong. Polina, about a young ballet dancer and her demanding teacher. And A Taste of Chlorine, about an almost wordless relationship between 2 people who frequent the same public pool. Breathtakingly poetic. These 2 books, which I read back to back, made me a big fan of Bastien Vives, whose work I've been seeking out ever since. Also one of the most impressive comics I've ever read, Asterios Polyp by David Mazzucchelli. This is formally bold and inventive, experimental, stylish, very brainy and cerebral, but at its core, it's a story of a not very likable man and his sort of redemption arc. And as traditional as that sounds, this completely non-traditional approach to it, the kind of postmodern techniques used in telling this story, set it aside, in my opinion, as one of the greatest comics I've read. This is one of those books you give to people to show them what the comics medium is capable of. Roughneck by Jeff Lemire. I was told after I mispronounced his name in another video that it's pronounced Lemire. Roughneck by Jeff Lemire is a really good book. It's completely realistic, unlike some of his more fantastical or science fictional stories, but very appealing nonetheless. If you're familiar with Essex County, Roughneck is a return to that type of storytelling for Lemire. I Killed Adolf Hitler. We've seen this with all my Jason singles on shelf 1, but this is the hardcover 10th anniversary edition. This is the first Jason book I ever read. I love it. It's one of my favorite comics, so I just had to get the hardcover 10th anniversary edition. If you want to check out Jason, this is a good one to start with, and this is a terrific edition to have. Speaking of great editions to have, here is my first hardcover edition of Understanding Comics. This seems to be pretty rare. I've just read it so many times. I love this book. It was a very important and very formative book in my adult comics reading life. I know that some people may have some criticisms of it, but I'm not smart enough to criticize Scott McCloud. This book was vital in opening my eyes to how the comics medium works, in making me feel good about having read comics since I was a kid and knowing that there was something great about it, but it gave me the vocabulary and the structure to explain to myself why it was such a powerful medium and why it affects me the way it does. It's one of the best books of theory I've read, but the fact that it's done as a comic book is just a masterful touch because it helps it illustrate the points it wants to make impeccably. I haven't read Reinventing Comics, which was Scott McCloud's follow-up to Understanding Comics, but I do have Making Comics, which I really enjoyed too, even though I am not a comics creator myself. There are some very interesting things in this book, and I'd love to know what comics creators think of this. Over here is Lifelike, which is an anthology of stories written by Dara Naraghi and drawn by various artists. I picked it up because Gabriel Ba and Fabio Moon have a story in this, but I enjoyed the other stories in it as well. And the last book on this shelf isn't a comic. It's Falling Up by Shel Silverstein, who I love. The fourth shelf is dominated by Vertigo Deluxe editions, firstly of Fables, the Fables Deluxe editions, volumes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 till 13. There's 14 and 15. There are 2 more that I need to get to complete the series, which I love. I originally started reading this series in the trade paperbacks. I loved them and switched to the deluxe editions when they came out. I will eventually make a video on Fables, but I'm just waiting to complete my collection in the deluxe edition form before I do so. Along with the 13 volumes that contain the main series, there's also the hardcover of 1001 Nights of Snowfall, which is a Fables anthology that comes in between volume 10 and volume 11 of the trade paperbacks, and the collected covers by James Jean, which are some of the most beautiful comics covers of recent years. Also from Vertigo, also deluxe editions, are the volumes of Sweet Tooth by Jeff Lemire. I showed the first trade paperback of this on Shelf 1. I enjoyed this so much that I decided to continue in the hardcover deluxe editions, and these 3 volumes contain the entire series. 2 trade paperbacks of Elfquest, The Final Quest, which is sort of the revival of Elfquest, or the continuing stories of Elfquest. An extra copy of Brian Talbot's Granville Bête Noire. We saw the entire Granville series on Shelf 7. Those are my Jonathan Cape editions. This one is a Dark Horse edition, which is slightly smaller than the UK editions. This is Alec, The Years Have Pants, the omnibus of Alec stories by Eddie Campbell. Eddie Campbell has become one of my favorite writer-artists. I mean, I always loved From Hell, but I did not know exactly the range that he was capable of until I started reading some of the books that we saw on Shelf 3, brought out by First Second, and then the Alec series. I still haven't read Bacchus, which is the big hole in my Eddie Campbell reading, which I hope to get to soon. And right at the end over here are 4 volumes of Red Moon, a children's comic series written by Carlos Trillo and illustrated by Eduardo Risso. I had no idea about this series. I picked it up just for the Eduardo Risso art, and I thought it was quite charming. It's not mind-blowing, but it's completely inoffensive, and it's wonderful to see Eduardo Risso, who has such adult drawings, with nudity and violence in 100 Bullets, take on children's stories. So that's volume 1, The Very Invisible Mr. Bran. Volume 2, Attack of the Circus. Volume 3, The Kingdom of Never. And Volume 4, The Book of Dreams. And right at the very end over there is an art book by James Jean. And to finish off, here's a quick look at the 5th and final shelf. The first book over here is Neat Stuff Book 1 by Bprd, the first volume in a 2-volume slipcase box set that I found in a used bookstore under a pile of other books. Maybe one day I'll be able to get my hands on book 2. The Sock Monkey Treasury by Tony Millionaire, and The Snake and the Lotus by Apu Pen, I discussed in one of my new acquisitions videos. Then we have Bprd Hell on Earth Omnibus Volume 1 and Volume 2. I don't have the previous Bprd omnibuses. They seem to be extremely hard to find. So I suppose if I want to own them, I'll have to go for the paperbacks, because I don't think those hardcovers are being reprinted. I do hope to get Hell on Earth in all 4 volumes hardcover by the time I'm done. Then we have the March Trilogy Slipcase Box Set Edition, a very handsome box set of 3 excellent books by Senator John Lewis, Andrew Aiden, and Nate Powell. And 4 omnibus volumes of the complete Elfquest brought out by Dark Horse Comics, one of the most famous and long-running independent comic series. These 4 volumes collect the original series, and then you have the Final Quest revival, which we saw on the shelf above. And finally, 3 of the colossal editions of Attack on Titan, a series that I really enjoyed in its anime form and then sought out the manga afterwards. And now I know that the anime is extremely faithful to the manga, sometimes to the exact line of dialogue. I'm really surprised I've enjoyed Attack on Titan as much as I have. Both the animated show and the comic could have been very loud and melodramatic in a way that I don't always enjoy. But in the case of Attack on Titan, surprisingly, perhaps I've really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed this quick look. I know I said that I'm going to do Black Hole, I'm going to do Fables, but if there are any other books that you'd like a closer look at or one of our edition comparisons, analyses, let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. This has been For the Love of Comics, and I'll see you at the next video.